Hello everyone, welcome to Grid Reliability Learning Objective 2. My name is Ellen Oswald and my co-host is David Sopata.
Hello everybody again.
And we will be reviewing our learning objective. The webinar learner will gain a brief understanding of business unit sampling and business process sampling performed during an appraisal, as evidenced by filling in the blank of a series of questions regarding where these activities take place in their organization and where applicable, and who is responsible for them. Business units, business processes, and assets all make up an organization. They're typically arranged within an organization in departments, groups, and even maybe informal cultures. Business units perform many different business processes, utilizing many assets found within the business unit. What we have here is an illustration of the overall organization. We have two business units, one identifying potential 693 NERC reliability standards, and one business unit applicable to SIP NERC reliability standards. Underneath each of those business units, there are supporting business processes, and under those business processes are applicable assets that those business processes refer to. Go ahead, David.
So here's an example of simple examples of a 693 organization or a department and a SIP organization or department. So on the left we have a SIP organization, we have a control center, and generally within those control centers we'd have some cybersecurity policies that would apply to that control center. In some organizations those policies may be organization-wide or company-wide, and maybe cookie-cutter or maybe individualized per different control centers. But in this simplified solution, we're just looking at the control center policies and procedures and their assets. And so within that control center, generally we would have a router or some sort of firewall that would be applicable to some of the cybersecurity policies. So for instance, SIP5 and SIP7 would be applicable to a router or a firewall that would be considered an access point. Then going to the 693 side, we have a business unit that's a generating facility, so I'll hand it off to Ellen for that.
Okay, we may have a business unit known as a generating facility, and that facility may have applicable 693 standards. To comply with those standards, they'll have business processes and manuals that identify the need and steps that the individuals may take to adhere to those standards. Also, they'll have assets that those business processes mention. What we'd like to identify now is that when we look at our appraisal process, we're looking at reliability and assurance, and we may actually are interested in going beyond just the NERC compliance standards and getting the additional assurance that the organization is supporting the reliability of the grid. So might go beyond our traditional standards, which might look at the PRC standards for maintenance or the FAC standards for tree trimming and making sure your substation is clear. David can explain our sampling.
So when we're going through the sampling processes, what we're sampling are different processes within the organization. So just like we've gone through within the different management practices that we've gone through earlier within this presentation, a lot of them lend us to ensure that we have a good handle on the business processes that are applicable to grid reliability. And so from those defined business units and business processes, We then also take a look at some of the assets within those business units and business processes. So typically when we're looking through and selecting, we would go have either a facilitated workshop approach, or maybe we would perform a survey, and we would go and ask the organization as a whole, what are the business units that are applicable to reliability? We would then drill down a little bit further and ask what are some of the business processes that help facilitate those business units. And in some cases, some of those business processes may have interdependencies upon different business units and may be cross-functional. So for instance, cyber security policies may be applicable to multiple business units and may be using the same business processes within the different business units. The same thing can also be applicable within assets when we're reviewing these business processes. Some of those assets may be applicable to multiple processes or business units. And so generally when we're selecting our sample, we go to the level of the business processes. And when we look at the different management practice areas, what we're doing is we're selecting those business process units, the business processes within those business units, and we generally select about 5 of them for a general appraisal. To learn more about the GRIPM appraisal methodology, we also have another learning module that you can reference to that has a more detailed sampling and appraisal process that may give you some more examples and or better understanding of the sampling process and what that would entail before you go out and perform an appraisal process with a given entity. So this is the end of the second learning objective, and so we have some high-level questions off of some of the things that you may have learned through this process. So the first question is, what are the typical business units in your organization that are critical to grid reliability and resilience? The second question would be, select from question 1 and list the top 5 business processes that impact grid reliability and resilience. And then the third question would be, describe some of the assets involved within the business process in question 2. So this is kind of a really good fill-in question set that you sort of have to think a little bit about and try to apply it to possibly your organization as you're going through the questions. So we'll pause the webinar for right now and then take a few minutes, and then once you answer the questions, we'll start back up. So we're back. We're going to answer the questions, and I'll let Ellen sort of go through question 1 and have her answer that one.
All right, thanks, David. So the first question, what are the typical business units in your organization that are critical to grid reliability and resilience? Well, there could be many business organizations, but for our example, we've already mentioned a control center and SCADA, so we might identify IT as a business unit of having a very significant for grid reliability, or there may be a SCADA business unit that would be significant to grid reliability. Additionally, we identified a generating facility, so it may be operations personnel, or you may consider your human resources department, which supports operations, as a critical business unit. It's really up to the organization to identify what's critical for their grid reliability. Our second question, select one from question 1 and list the top 5 business processes that impact grid reliability and resiliency. So for our example, we've selected IT as being critical to grid reliability. So they might have a cybersecurity policy, or if we've selected HR, they may have a training and certification policy. So no matter what business unit you select, you need to be able to understand what processes support grid reliability. Our third question describes some of the assets involved with the business process in question 2. All right, so assets that could include IT equipment in the IT cybersecurity policy, or people in the HR training and certification process. We may look at routers, we may look at networks for IT. For the human resources training and certification process, it may also be routers and networks to support the collection of those records.
Or possibly even people. It could also be considered an asset as well. So within the HR training and certification process, we look at people and people resources, making sure that they have the proper certifications and also training to ensure they have the skills to complete the processes that we're assessing. So I think that's pretty much it for the answers to the questions. Once again, as we sort of talked about before, many of these processes and procedures and assets and business units can sometimes overlap or interrelate within each other, where different business units might be borrowing or sharing the same processes and or assets within the organization. So sometimes that can be a little bit on the complicated side, but we generally try to break it up and focus on the processes and then look at the assets that apply to those different processes. And so that's the end of this learning module, and thank you very much for participating, and we have another learning module as well, Learning Objective 3. So thank you, and we'll see you in Learning Objective 3.
Thanks.